Looking around the world now, you've got China sort of playing by its own playbook economically. You have the U.S. playing by its own playbook, ignoring various agreements, including at times USMCA. What does that mean for the rules-based system for a middle power like Canada?
At the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a message that left many in Washington unsettled.
And nobody's perfect in this. We have a free trade agreement with the European Union. And we're re-engaging with China and other major economies in terms of developing the rules bilaterally with them.
He announced that Canada would re-engage with China, seeking to establish a new framework for bilateral rules. This declaration landed just as the United States, under President Trump, has extended its reciprocal tariff regime to every major trading partner, including Canada. The tariffs were meant to force others into accepting America's terms. Yet Carney signaled that Canada was ready to chart its own path. Instead of bowing to pressure, Ottawa is turning outward, searching for new alliances and new leverage. The story begins with a clash of visions. Trump builds walls of tariffs. Carney opens doors to alternative partners. That contrast sets the stage for what comes next.
Carney made clear that both Washington and Beijing are playing by their own rulebooks. For Canada, that reality means waiting for others to return to multilateral discipline is no longer an option. Ottawa will now attempt to develop direct rules with China, recognizing the risks but also the opportunities of engaging the world's second-largest economy. Sensitive areas such as national security and data privacy will remain closed. Yet Canada intends to carve out a controlled space for trade and cooperation. This is not surrender, but calculation. With Trump escalating confrontation and tariffs disrupting steel, autos, and farm products, Carney has decided that Canada must place a chip on every table. The re-engagement with China is meant to give Ottawa more balance and more say, even if it means moving in a direction opposite to Washington. This step is designed to give Canada breathing room at a time when U.S. trade actions are tightening around all partners. Carney also reminded his audience that Canada already holds positions in two of the world's largest rules-based systems, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, known as CPTPP, and the Canada-EU Free Trade Agreement. These agreements include standards for labor and sustainability, the kind of provisions that are recognizable and enforceable. By being part of both, Ottawa can serve as a bridge between Europe and Asia. The United States, by contrast, has stepped away. Trump pulled America out of the original TPP and has repeatedly ignored commitments under USMCA. Carney's point was not hidden. Canada is investing in systems where rules matter, while Washington sidelines itself. As those networks expand, America risks becoming the bystander. Ottawa is signaling that its future will not be locked inside Trump's tariff cage. Instead, Canada is building the kind of international bridges that leave Washington outside the room when new rules are written. Carney did not deny Canada's vulnerability. Nearly 80% of Canadian trade still flows south into the United States. But he emphasized the importance of what he called the growth at the margin. New trade with Europe, with CPTPP countries, and with China can shift the balance over time. Even small increases in those directions can change the outlook for industries battered by tariffs. Trump's reciprocal tariffs, meant to squeeze, are creating the incentive for Canada to move elsewhere. The backfire is clear. Instead of reinforcing dependence, the policy has accelerated diversification. Canada is showing that it can step out of America's shadow and place itself in the center of a different global map. The contrast could not be sharper. Trump designed his tariff regime to keep Canada in line, but Carney's new approach flips that logic. By re-engaging with China and doubling down on Europe and Asia, Ottawa is no longer asking Washington for permission. Canada is signaling that it has options and that the United States is not the only game in town. This is the image that left Trump stunned, watching as his neighbor quietly walked out of the cage he built. That is why Carney's words in New York carried such weight. Trump sought to lock Canada in. Ottawa has walked out, leaving the U.S. president stunned as his northern neighbor rewrites the script of survival and influence.
Tonight, the man who has reshaped the world order, for better or worse, entered the history books, touching down at Stansted to become the first ever president to have the red carpet rolled out twice for a state visit.
President Donald Trump arrived in Britain this week with the kind of ceremony that few leaders ever received. He became the first American president to be granted a second state visit, complete with the red carpet, a helicopter ride into London, and the promise of a royal welcome at Windsor Castle. It should have been a triumph, a reminder of prestige and tradition.
It's a great honor, and this one's at Windsor. They've never used Windsor Castle for this before, but basically I'm there also on trade.
Yet within minutes of his arrival, the story turned in a very different direction.
As Donald Trump arrives in London, so begins a charm offensive on an epic scale.
Protesters managed to project images of Trump with Jeffrey Epstein onto the ancient walls of Windsor Castle. What was supposed to be a symbol of respect and dignity became a global embarrassment. The trip was designed to showcase power and legitimacy. Instead, the opening act left an unforgettable stain. The president came to London seeking to shift the narrative away from domestic controversies and to bask in the splendor of Britain's monarchy. He spoke often of his friendship with King Charles and clearly believed that Windsor Castle, used for the first time as the centerpiece of a state visit, would elevate his image. The plan was simple: drown out criticism with pageantry. But optics are fragile. What people remember is not the lavish banquet or the guard of honor. They remember the projected images that spread instantly across social media. Instead of being portrayed as a statesman, Trump was mocked worldwide. It is striking that a leader who has built his political brand on control and dominance could see the narrative collapse so quickly. He can order tariffs that reshape world trade, but he could not stop a small projector from defining the moment. Beyond the ceremony, the trip carried serious business. The United Kingdom is looking to adjust its trade arrangement with the United States. Trump hinted that London might get a slightly better deal, but there were no clear commitments. Britain has been struggling with the ripple effects of Washington's reciprocal tariff policy, which applies rates of 10 to 50% on a wide range of imports. For UK exporters in sectors like steel and aluminum, the pressure is real. That is why British officials wanted this visit to produce something more concrete. Yet the most significant economic news of the week did not come from the White House at all. It came from Microsoft. The company announced a $30 billion investment in the United Kingdom, the single largest financial commitment it has ever made there. The funds will expand data centers and support an advanced artificial intelligence supercomputer. For the UK, this is not just symbolism. It is a tangible boost to infrastructure, innovation, and jobs. And for observers, it underscored an awkward truth. While Trump tried to dominate headlines with royal splendor, the lasting legacy of the visit may belong to a technology giant. By the time Air Force One departs, what will remain in the public memory is not the banquets or the photo opportunities. It will be the clash between the carefully staged theater of diplomacy and the raw disruption of a protester's projector. Britain may still push for trade relief, and the Microsoft deal will move forward regardless of political optics. But Trump's effort to reset his image abroad has been overshadowed. The visit was meant to be a charm offensive, proof of status and friendship. Instead, it showed how easily prestige can unravel. In the end, Windsor 2025 will not be remembered for the elegance of the monarchy. It will be remembered for how quickly ceremony gave way to humiliation, and how a simple beam of light managed to outshine the world's most powerful man.
More than 300 South Korean nationals detained in a U.S. immigration raid are now back home. They were detained during an ICE raid at a plant under construction in the state of Georgia. It was being built as a joint venture between South Korean giants LG Energy Solution and Hyundai.
It began with images that stunned both South Korea and the United States. Over 300 South Korean engineers and technicians flown in to help build a state-of-the-art Hyundai and LG battery plant in Georgia were suddenly placed in handcuffs.
ICE agents arrived with helicopters and armored vehicles, pointed guns, and detained workers who had no idea why they were being treated as criminals. These were not undocumented workers. They were skilled specialists brought in under short-term visas to launch one of the largest foreign investments in America. The sight of them returning home to Seoul with plastic bags carrying their belongings struck a nerve. What should have been a story of cooperation became a symbol of distrust.
The raid triggered an outcry from South Korea, a key U.S. ally, and raised questions about foreign investment in the U.S.
The Trump administration has spent months building a reputation for toughness. Reciprocal tariffs of 10 to 50% have been rolled out. A 100% tariff on imported semiconductors has been announced, with exemptions only for companies that commit major investment in the United States. In that climate, the Georgia raid was meant to send another signal that America would control its borders on its own terms. But the consequences went far beyond immigration enforcement. South Korean companies immediately questioned whether the United States is a safe place to expand. Conservative newspapers in Seoul, usually supportive of the U.S. alliance, openly warned that investment plans could be reconsidered. Families of the detained engineers watched their loved ones return home in tears. In a country where corporate reputation is tied to national pride, the perception that elite workers were chained and mocked by guards was devastating. What was intended as a show of strength quickly turned into a warning sign for global investors.
Faced with outrage, Washington tried to contain the fallout. A senior State Department official was sent to Seoul to express regret. President Trump himself posted a message saying foreign companies were welcome and their workers would be allowed to train Americans. Yet his words raised more questions than they solved. He spoke about letting Korean experts teach American workers, then phasing them out. To many in South Korea, this sounded less like an apology and more like a declaration that their people were disposable. The damage was already clear. Public protests in Seoul displayed banners asking whether America was still a friend. Social media in Korea filled with calls for lawsuits against the U.S. government and demands that LG and Hyundai stand firm. Some voices even urged reciprocal measures against Americans working in Korea. Instead of reassuring one of its closest allies, the administration had created a storm of resentment. In diplomacy, words matter, but so do actions, and the actions in Georgia cut deeper than any tweet could repair. The Georgia incident is more than an isolated raid. It highlights the contradiction at the heart of current U.S. policy. Washington is demanding that allies like South Korea commit hundreds of billions of dollars in new investments to qualify for tariff caps. At the same time, it is allowing immigration crackdowns that humiliate the very workers needed to make those projects succeed. For South Korea, which already pledged a $350 billion investment package, the raid exposed the risks of relying too heavily on the U.S. market. For America, it risked undermining the credibility of the promise that the country is open for business. In global supply chains, confidence is as important as capital. Once lost, it cannot be restored easily. The message from Georgia is clear. A policy built on pressure and unpredictability can just as easily backfire. Instead of attracting investment, it can drive it away. Instead of strengthening alliances, it can weaken them. The handcuffs and chains placed on engineers in Georgia may be remembered not as a triumph of enforcement, but as a turning point when America's strategy pushed an ally to question its trust.